2002. Columbus, Ohio. A foster home. 6 children, 2 adults who were supposed to protect them. They smiled at every social worker, passed every inspection. Behind that door, the children were invisible. $180,000 collected, $30,000 spent on the children, the rest taken. Then a teacher noticed a 12-year-old girl wearing the same clothes 3 days in a row and asked, 6 children, 1 teacher, 1 question that changed everything. This is their story. Their names were Gary and Linda, a couple in their late 40s living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, licensed foster parents for 11 years, praised repeatedly by caseworkers, respected in their community, and completely trusted by the system that had placed 6 children in their care. They attended church on Sundays, maintained a well-kept home, greeted social workers warmly at the door during routine inspections, and had built a reputation over more than a decade as exactly the kind of stable, committed foster family that the child welfare system desperately needed more of. What was happening behind the front door of that house was something entirely different from the picture Gary and Linda had spent 11 years carefully constructing for every social worker, neighbor, and community member who had ever come to that door and been given no reason to look further. The children in their care ranged in age from 7 to 14, all placed through the Franklin County foster care system, all arriving from difficult and unstable backgrounds, all entirely dependent on the adults the state had legally entrusted with their safety, their health, and their daily well-being. Gary and Linda received foster care payments from the state of Ohio for each child in their home, a combined monthly income that by 2001 had reached over $3,200 per month, money specifically and legally designated for each child's food, clothing, medical care, school supplies, and basic daily needs. The children were underfed consistently and deliberately. Meals were minimal and infrequent. Children regularly went to bed hungry in a house where the adults ate differently and separately, a division the children understood without ever being told was intentional and that they learned early not to question. Clothing was inadequate across every season. Children wore the same items repeatedly regardless of weather, shoes that no longer fit were never replaced, and requests for basic necessities were either ignored entirely or met with withdrawal of the small comforts the children were otherwise permitted. Medical and dental appointments that the state legally required foster parents to schedule were missed consistently, not occasionally, not due to unavoidable circumstance, but systematically across multiple children and multiple years in a pattern that any proper audit would have surfaced immediately. The children were never permitted to speak freely with social workers during routine inspections. Gary or Linda was always present during every visit, positioned close enough to make clear exactly what the consequences would be if the wrong thing was said, while a caseworker was in the room. None of the 6 children ever said the wrong thing during an inspection, because they had all learned, through experience, exactly what happened in that house when adults left and the front door closed again behind them. Amara was 12 years old when she was transferred to a new school district in the spring of 2002. A routine administrative event caused by a family relocation within Columbus that Gary and Linda had no reason to believe would become the single circumstance that unraveled everything. Her new teacher was a woman named Ms. Carroll, 28 years old, 4 years in the classroom, the kind of educator who learned every student's name in the first week and paid close attention to details that revealed how a child was actually doing beyond what they said or did not say. She noticed Amara on the 3rd day, the same clothes as the first 2 days, a lunch clearly insufficient for a child her age and size, a quietness that was not shyness but something heavier and more practiced, a way of taking up as little space as possible that Ms. Carroll recognized as learned behavior. She did not act on instinct alone. She watched carefully for 2 more weeks, kept detailed written observations, consulted with the school counselor, and then filed a formal report with Child Protective Services that was specific, thoroughly documented, and impossible to receive and file away without action. CPS assigned an experienced investigator named David to the case, and David interviewed Amara separately from Gary and Linda, in a child-appropriate setting with a trained interviewer present, using evidence-based techniques designed to allow children to describe their experiences without leading questions or pressure. Amara spoke for nearly 2 hours, describing not a single incident, but a consistent daily reality of neglect she had normalized because it was the only version of home she had known for 3 years, and she had no framework for imagining something different. She described the locked bedroom door at night, the meals that were never enough, the cold winters with clothing that did not fit, the medical appointments that were promised and never happened, and the way Gary and Linda changed completely when someone from the outside came to the house. The other 5 children were interviewed separately across the following week. Different locations, different times, no opportunity for accounts to influence each other. And the consistency across all 6 interviews was described by the lead investigator as among the most compelling corroboration he had encountered in 15 years of child welfare work. Financial records were subpoenaed immediately. 3 full years of state foster care payment records, Gary and Linda's bank accounts, credit card statements, and all available receipts. And the forensic picture that emerged was stark, detailed, and damning. Across 3 years, Gary and Linda had collected $187,000 in state payments legally designated for the children in their care, and forensic accountants determined that less than $30,000 had been spent on the children's actual food, clothing, medical care, or educational needs across the entire period. The remaining $157,000 had been directed towards significant home renovations, 2 out-of-state family vacations, a new vehicle in Linda's name, personal expenditures across multiple categories, and cash withdrawals traced entirely to personal spending with no connection to childcare of any kind. What made the financial picture particularly damning was the contrast: a renovated kitchen, a new bathroom, a vehicle less than 2 years old, set against children who had gone without adequate food, clothing, and medical care for 3 consecutive years in the same house. Gary and Linda were arrested simultaneously on a Wednesday morning in May 2002. Officers arriving while all 6 children were present, with CPS removal workers standing by to ensure every child was safely relocated the moment the adults were taken into custody. All 6 children were placed in emergency foster care arrangements that same morning, separated initially due to placement limitations, though caseworkers worked actively over the following months to reunite sibling groups and identify longer-term stable placements. Gary was charged with child neglect, fraud against the state, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable population. Linda faced identical charges, and both were held on bail that reflected the full seriousness of what prosecutors intended to pursue at trial. The investigation also examined 11 years of foster care inspections that had consistently cleared Gary and Linda, finding a pattern of superficial review, inadequate follow-up, and caseworker caseloads so unreasonably high that thorough inspection was structurally impossible within existing resources. This systemic failure, not just the individual crimes of Gary and Linda, became part of the public record of the case and contributed to a review of foster care oversight practices in Franklin County that resulted in new inspection protocols implemented the following year. Gary was convicted on all counts in 2004 and sentenced to 8 years. Linda received 6 years, both permanently barred from any licensed involvement with children in any professional or caregiving capacity, their foster care license revoked retroactively across its entire 11-year history. Amara aged out of the foster care system at 18 and has spoken publicly as an adult about what she experienced, about Ms. Carroll specifically, about the moment one adult decided that what she noticed about a quiet girl wearing the same clothes 3 days in a row was worth acting on. She said in one interview, "The thing I want people to understand is that we were not invisible. We were right there, every inspection, every Sunday at church, every school morning. We just needed one person to look past what Gary and Linda wanted them to see." The foster care system in the United States serves over 400,000 children at any given time. The majority of foster families provide genuine, committed, life-changing care. But structural vulnerabilities, including underfunded oversight and overwhelming caseworker caseloads, create conditions where exploitation can persist undetected for years. If you work with children in any capacity and something does not look right, a child who seems hungry, withdrawn, wearing inadequate clothing, missing school, or changing behavior in ways that concern you, the most important thing you can do is ask, report, and follow through without waiting for certainty. The children who need protection most are often the ones least able to ask for it themselves, and the adults most skilled at exploitation are often the ones who have spent years learning exactly how to look like the opposite of what they are. Ms. Carroll filed one report, and 6 children were removed from a home that had been failing them for 3 years. 2 adults were held accountable in a court of law, and a 12-year-old girl who had learned to make herself invisible finally had a chance to take up space in the world. Subscribe to Dark Chapters US, because there are many more chapters left to uncover, and none of them are easy to read.